1, 7, 5, 2, 8. That is the number of times that the work that our next speaker has been referenced by others in the course of their work. That is how many citations have accrued to him in the scholarly record, right? 17,528 times. And that is a mark of his sustained contributions to the field, the impact he makes, the amount of hundreds and thousands of people around the world who are building upon and using his work. Some of them happen to be fake citations, Franken citations now from AI is creating fake citations that are accruing to Ben. And he's writing about that as well. So he's done incredible work for so many years, and not just in the great depth of his scholarship, but also he mediates that through his blog. You can see all his work there on Codex in education. You can find out about all the work he's doing, and it's always timely and relevant. He's always talking about key issues in education. And he mediates his work through social media as well. And this is part of his mission to reach wider publics with his work and not just speak to the scholarly record. He's also a leader in the field. He is an editor of the journal Learning, Media and Technology. He is also a co-director of the Digital Research Lab in Edinburgh University. And I was in Edinburgh recently in his institution. They have the Futures Institute there. Some of the top researchers in the world are there. And I was very fortunate to be there. And I thought this is my chance to ask these people, some of the greatest minds in digital learning in working today, one question. So I said, have you any dirt on Ben? And they started talking incessantly for about 2 hours. And I took copious notes. And they didn't say anything bad about him, because it turns out he's a lovely guy. So we're greatly looking forward to hearing from you, Dr. Williamson.
Well, thank you, Eamon and Rob, and thank you so much for inviting me and welcoming me here to Dublin and to your great conference. My talk today starts, though, at a different learning technologies event. So about 18 months ago, I was at what is called the biggest education technology exhibition in the world. It's the British Educational Technology Trade Show in London. Now, some of you may know it, but for those of you who don't, BET is a gigantic, highly commercialized and massively over-caffeinated EdTech exhibition and conference. It has hundreds of vendors and thousands of visitors at the gigantic Excel Centre in London. So you could say it's something like a modern day great expo for EdTech. It's kind of like the great exhibitions of the 19th century, because BET and other big exhibitions like it is where utopian projections about the digital future of educational technology are projected and, of course, sold to policymakers and to teachers. So the digital future of education is made to appear inevitable and mostly desirable. It's depicted in seductive visuals, affective discourses that make you feel all warm about tech, and through brand-named demonstrations at places like the Google stall. So BET, in other words, is an event where EdTech futures are fabricated. Now, just before I go any further on my talk about fabricating EdTech futures today, I just need to acknowledge that the talk is part of our work at the Centre for Socio-Digital Futures, which is funded by the Economic and Social Research Council in the UK. And the underpinning work that I'm drawing on today is from collaboration with my wonderful colleagues, Kerry Facer, Jessica Pikett, Arafi Sriprakash, and Carolina Valadares Celes. None of them are here today, but I couldn't do this talk without them. And part of the research agenda at the Centre for Socio-Digital Futures is to investigate the making or the fabrication of future digital visions, scenarios, and predictions across a range of sectors and domains of activity, including education and learning. So in our particular strand of work, what we've been doing is studying how particular claims are made about the future of education. And we've been asking quite specifically what particular techniques, methods, technologies, and practices are used to make those claims about the future. And who does this work to make those claims on the future and why? Okay, so to try to do that work, we've been drawing on previous research on what is called techniques of futuring. So these futuring techniques refer, as Uman and colleagues have put it, to the methods, practices, and associated technologies through which visions, stories, or scenarios of the future are produced. So various speculative technologies and devices and expertise are now routinely used to produce what we might call future facts and data, and various predictive knowledge technologies or knowledge infrastructures even have been constructed to calculate and, as it were, preview the future in advance. But as people working on ideas about futuring have argued, these kinds of techniques of futuring are not just about calculating the future. So futurists have long argued that making the future seem more knowable makes it seem more manageable, makes the future seem more certain and something that you can actually act on and shape and mold. And that's why futuring then has also been called social engineering, not just speculation. So futuring then, from the perspective that I want to argue today, is both about using specific kinds of methods and technologies for predicting or forecasting or speculating, but it's also about catalyzing action in the present to arrive at a preferred future destination. Now, why does this matter? Well, as sociologists have put it, this is because this is a matter of influencing expectations to put selected futures in motion. So futuring methods function as social and political technologies, not just speculative technologies. EdTech futuring is then fundamentally a political matter of shaping the sector to suit particular ambitions, objectives, or we might say interests. So in our work, what we're trying to do is we're trying to document these EdTech futuring techniques through a methodology of critical futuring, where by critical futuring, we mean the effort to kind of sort of deconstruct, to denaturalize, in some respects to historicize imagined futures, to show how future projections or imaginaries are not self-evident or natural, but they're always the result of social processes, interests, methods, technologies, and so on. And so it's a critical futuring approach that we've put to work in trying to deconstruct and denaturalize some ideas about the kind of digital, the inevitable, the desirable digital future of education. So, the rest of the talk is arranged around what I'm calling the 4 Ps of EdTech futuring. These are projecting, prototyping, pilot testing, and product trialing. And I'm going to argue these constitute 4 different types of futuring techniques that are being enacted in our education systems today to shape tomorrow. So first, projecting. So this projecting refers to how EdTech finance and investment actors are making claims about the future of EdTech based on claims of its monetary value. Now, we are interested as researchers in EdTech finance and investing because it's often the decisions of investors that determine what kinds of technologies come to exist or not. If you want to make and launch a technology, you often need investors. If the investors don't turn up and hand you over the money, your technology doesn't exist. So certain kinds of futures become possible and certain futures become foreclosed by the decisions of investors. So financial investors deploy technologies and methods to claim knowledge and control of the future in order to guarantee the generation of streams of revenue when that future happens, as the sociologist Liliana Duganova has argued. So it seems significant then that EdTech investors often speculate that education will be a $10 trillion market by 2030. Now, of course, investors want the best possible financial returns from that multi-trillion-dollar market. And that means they need methods and techniques to calculate the future market value of any startup company or product that they're interested in investing in. So, illustratively, the EdTech market intelligence firm HolonIQ claims to have assembled a range of methods for calculating the market prospects of startups across the EdTech industry. So, for example, it refers to tracking millions of data signals of EdTech value in terms of returns on investment. So to analyze these millions of signals, it says it mobilizes a proprietary methodology that includes trend tracking, machine learning-driven revenue estimates, and consensus algorithms that reconcile and triangulate diverse market data to produce calculative previews of the growth markets of the future. And these data then are supposed to help its clients, investors, to anticipate the future returns of any investment so that they can make their funding decisions confidently in the present. Now, we've referred to these kinds of techniques as algorithmic futuring, as the investment industry represented here by HolonIQ focuses very strongly on using big data, analytics, machine learning, and of course AI in its market analyses. And these kinds of algorithmic futuring methods are also central to HolonIQ's projection of different future scenarios of education in 2030. So these kinds of scenarios are kind of narratives of the future that HolonIQ claims are underpinned by big textual analyses. So it says that it uses natural language processing to gather the views and opinions of thousands of experts from around the world at a scale not possible without machine learning, by accessing millions of news articles, blog posts, company profiles, and patents, and running natural language processing algorithms that can read and analyze massive amounts of data at one time. Quite breathlessly, it says that kind of thing. So these algorithmic futuring methods of data mining expertise at scale then enable this organization, HolonIQ, to produce these kinds of, supposed to be convincing cluster maps that are supposed to communicate consensus and authority about what the future of EdTech will be like. Now, whether those forecasts or scenarios come true, or whether HolonIQ is just blowing hot air, is besides the point. Rather, the expectations that are produced through these methods can still function as authoritative targets for actions and decision-making. So what matters really is not whether this future comes to be, it's whether people act on these future projections as if they were authoritative and credible. So ultimately, HolonIQ's algorithmic futuring is supposed to provoke speculative financial investments in promising EdTech. And this is in keeping with financial speculation more generally, which sustains the effort to deploy new technologies at scale, as Marion Fourcade and Kieran Healy have put it. The financial investor sees everything as a capital good or asset. In other words, something that will bring a return in the future, as Yves Chiapello and Christian Walter have argued. So for EdTech investors, market forecasts and scenarios are projections of the future that are supposed to power investment decisions now. The concern is always the future return. The forecasts and scenarios are supposed to act as triggers for financial decisions about investing in the present. They're supposed to power the decisions that matter. Now, the second type of futuring is prototyping. So in our project, we understand prototyping as after Navarro, Aguiar and colleagues, we understand prototyping as a designified futuring practice that involves experimenting with, speculating about, and preemptively creating the future. So a prototype in this sense is the material or the technical form of a combination of concepts, ideas, visions, expectations, and visualizations related to the future. And of course, as a designed artifact, a prototype then helps to bring about new kinds of practices. So to illustrate this, the Government Department for Education in England is currently funding a series of EdTech companies and startups to construct prototypes of so-called trustworthy AI tech to help teachers with lesson planning and marking. So we need to go back to BET briefly. So back at BET, the Education Secretary in England, Bridget Phillipson, delivered this big speech in front of the big industry crowd about her vision for the future, one where education is backed by evidence-based tech and teachers are set free by AI. We're deploying AI to make that vision a reality, she said. It's a game changer. No. Sorry. So what this game-changing activity would involve, Phillipson then announced, was that the Department for Education was going to seed fund EdTech firms to construct AI prototypes that were based on national curriculum resources that the department itself was going to make available through its own prototype data and content service. So just to give you the background on this, in the year before Phillipson gave the speech, the department had been working with an AI company to construct this prototype, an AI content store designed to pool and encode curriculum guidance, lesson plans, and anonymized pupil work, which will then be used by AI companies to train their tools to generate accurate, high-quality content. So it consisted of the prototype store of data and content itself, plus a browsing functionality and an API that would allow the data to be integrated into other third-party EdTech apps and platforms. So as you can see from the title of the technical report, this was pitched as a proof of concept for generative AI feedback and resource generation in schools in England. What happened next was the department actively funded 16 EdTech companies to use the AI content store to build and train their own AI prototype apps. And further funding was later announced for those that ran successful pilots. So prototyping of this kind, we've argued, is a kind of design futuring that constructs the future of education by prefiguring teachers' pedagogic practices. So the future first gets kind of configured in the code of the prototype, if you like. And then, as Antisari and Matthias de Cupera have put it, prototypes shape proto-practices. Those are the reconfigured pedagogies that are demanded by the design of the prototype itself. And what prototyping also does as a design futuring technique is it substitutes empirical evidence of technology use and effects in social contexts of classrooms with speculative proof of concept models and exemplar use cases that are supposed to be emulated in other school settings. And that takes us to our third technique of futuring. Pilot testing. And pilot testing, I'm going to stick with the Department for Education example, because this is where a big scheme of pilot testing is beginning to take off in England. So around the same time as Bridget Phillipson's speech at BET in January 2025, the Department for Education put out an announcement saying, we want to build the evidence base on the impact and scalability of promising technologies. The department has committed £1 million for a pilot scheme which will improve evidence quality for EdTech by providing a structured environment for testing and evaluating new technologies. Now, that structured environment refers to recruiting schools to become test beds where new EdTech can be tested out. Now, we're thinking of this pilot testing as a form of experimental futuring. It's an experiment in testing out tech in live school settings to produce an evidence base that can then be used to shape future policy and practice. But what kind of evidence base is this? Well, I guess we're thinking of it at the moment as a kind of promissory evidence base that emphasizes the impact and scalability of promising technologies. This is not the results of a massive scheme of evidence production. This is about production of signals of promising technologies that might be able to be taken to scale. So in January this year, Bridget Phillipson was back at BET again. I'm almost starting to feel sorry for her. It was 2 years in a row she had to go there to make a big announcement. But she was back at BET announcing that this pilot testbed scheme that had been running through 2025 with £1 million was now being significantly expanded. To keep building that evidence base, I can announce today that we're investing an additional £23 million to expand our EdTech testbed pilot into a 4-year programme, she announced. It'll now recruit 1,000 schools and colleges to put the latest tech and AI tools through their paces in the cut and thrust of classrooms across the country. Okay, so now we're talking about a huge number of schools being recruited as AI testing sites in England. They are scaling up the testbed, if you like. And this means making school children and teachers into test participants whose everyday classroom activities are now going to be part of this governmental and commercial, public-private aim to construct this kind of anticipatory evidence about promising technologies. Now, looking at this EdTech and AI testbed program from a sociological perspective, it resonates with a wider tendency towards what Tao Fan and others have called testing in the wild and experimentation beyond the laboratory. So over the last decade or so, this kind of live testing of tech in society has become much more common. So you can think of self-driving cars on city streets in California, for example, as testing in the wild. The kind of constant A/B testing or the sort of manipulation of social media is a kind of testing in the wild of the kind of infrastructures of everyday sociality and so on. The fact that generative AI was released before it really had any proper use cases and so on is another example of experimentation beyond the laboratory. We're all part of these kinds of experimental efforts these days. We take part in mass tech experimentation, whether we know it about it or whether we like it or whether we don't. So Noortje Maas and David Stark, the sociologists, have then argued that the proliferation of tests across society is today intimately connected to the organizational, technical, material modifications of society, often by computational means. Modifications that render social life observable, analyzable, and influenceable by a variety of actors. And they say, what is more important than the test results is what results from the tests. Okay, so this is I think, an interesting way to think about the EdTech pilot testing. So the EdTech testbed will certainly produce test results. But perhaps more interesting is what will result from the tests. Okay, so as for the test results, this is what I mean about the construction of the kind of promissory or anticipatory evidence. The test results will consist of indicators of impact and signals of promise of scalability. So this is specifically what the tests are for, working out which tech works and promises to be most effectively scaled across the sector in the future. But then what results from the tests? So the test bed means that classrooms have to be made testable. The AI treatment has to be injected into the setting. Children's outcomes and behaviors, teachers' activities, these things all have to be made measurable. So you have to, as it were, set up the classroom to accommodate the methodology and its instruments of measurement. Classrooms have to become modifiable, observable, analyzable, and influenceable testing sites for experimental AI prototypes and practices. Okay, so in other words, what results from this live testbed is a transformation of the school. It becomes a proto-setting for an imagined future of AI proficient education in England's schools, as the Tony Blair Institute recently put it. Or, as Noortje Maas argues, testbeds represent the reduction of social settings to environments which serve to realize the purposes of innovation. A testbed makes human life itself an experiment for technology futures, as Orit Halpin and Gökçe Günal have argued. So this experimental futuring then recasts the public setting of the school as a kind of reductive site for beta tests of private tech. The testbed makes students' lives an experiment in EdTech future making, reducing students to test subjects. It makes the tested classroom into a kind of demo that then government ministers and policymakers can roll out at places like the Bet Show to demonstrate that they're turbocharging their vision across the entire sector. Finally, we come to the fourth form of futuring that we've been trying to investigate in our project, product trialing. This is about large technology and AI companies testing the education market for their products. So one major example, very recent, is a randomized controlled trial just announced by Google DeepMind with the EdTech company Edie to test DeepMind's Learn LM AI tutor with 1,500 school children in 10 schools in England. It follows a previous RCT with 1,700 school children in Sierra Leone last year. And the idea of both is that Google will use the findings to improve the performance of its AI tutor. So I'm calling this type of futuring scalable futuring, because as you're about to see, there is a significant emphasis here on product trialing at scale. It's also about building huge scale markets and about developing the most scalable products. And it's also about doing learning technology research and development at scales that academic education research and learning tech departments probably can't even imagine. So, for example, the Google team involved in this AI tutoring project consists of about 80 people across Google, ED, a few academic partners, and it consists of wide expertise spanning technology, research, what it calls learning science. Similarly, OpenAI recently announced a learning outcomes measurement suite, a structured measurement system to measure AI's impact on learners at scale, and a mechanism to improve models based on those outcomes. So from the graphic, you can probably roughly see how it's supposed to work. So this suite gathers data during learning sessions, which it calls the in-session signals up there. It also collects over time signals, such as assessments and cognitive tests, plus partner-provided ground truth, such as past exam results, observations, and attendance. And then these data are supposed to deliver insights to teachers up here in terms of pedagogical approaches, but also feed back into the model, which you can see here, to improve its performance. Now, after OpenAI has finished running a randomized controlled trial of this measurement system with 20,000 students in Estonia, OpenAI then plans to release this suite as a public resource for schools, universities, and education systems worldwide. And to help get it adopted by other researchers at this scale, as a kind of standard for measuring AI effects, it's established a learning lab, which is described as a learning research ecosystem in partnership with academics from institutions in the US and the UK. So OpenAI is basically trying to establish a kind of global measurement standard for large-scale AI research in education. And the final example here is from OpenAI's competitor, Anthropic, which is currently in the process of launching a knowledge network in partnership with the organization CodePath. There's not much public information about this yet, except for a couple of LinkedIn posts. But in those posts, it's described as a structured research sharing group built on a live research spine to open source what we're learning as we study how AI tools affect student outcomes at scale. And it refers to a 15-month observational study across thousands of students and a continuous research agenda inside real classrooms at scale, which is built to move as fast as the technology does. So for me, these Google DeepMind, OpenAI, and Anthropic initiatives all kind of exemplify what I'm calling scalable futuring practices. They involve product trialing of educational applications of Gemini, ChatGPT, and Claude in real-world education settings at very large scales, often in international and national partnership arrangements. All of this trialing is dressed up with discursive assurances of objective scientific rigor, innovation in methodology, and evidence production. But it really represents kind of scaled up, commercialized, data, compute-intensive, EdTech R&D. It's promoted as leading-edge learning science research, but it's also intended to produce the kind of market monopolizing instructional infrastructures of the future. The research benefits may not really be to science or society, but to the AI companies in terms of product improvement and market penetration. So, time to quickly wrap up. My main point today has been that these 4 kinds of EdTech futuring are all intended to make digital futures materialize in particular kinds of ways. So algorithmic futuring refers to investors projecting futures that promise a financial return in the future. Design futuring means prototyping future products to prefigure pedagogic practices. Experimental futuring articulates how pilot testing might reconfigure educational settings. And this scalable futuring idea refers to these large-scale product trials and efforts to construct markets for these kinds of AI tutor products at scale. So just to return to one of the ideas from the start of the talk, what we see here is a certain politics of expectation playing out. So for the sociologist Jens Becker, the term politics of expectation refers to a kind of competitive struggle over legitimacy or authority to make claims about the future. There's always contests going on about who has kind of the vision of the future that other people should kind of agree with and act on. So futuring then is not only about claiming knowledge about the future, but about producing conviction in others that they need to act in the present in light of knowledge about that future. And that, I think, is what's going on in these 4 forms of futuring that I've outlined today. And it doesn't really matter if this kind of futuring is accurate. What matters is influencing how others act on claims about the future. And that means those who can influence expectations through seemingly authoritative knowledge claims have significant power. So this is a political contest over who gets to participate in EdTech futures, about who is included and who's excluded from educational future making. Thanks so much for the invitation and for your time this afternoon.
Thank you very much. Sure, people like talking to them. Green, yeah, green is go. Okay. Thank you very much, Ben, for a wonderful talk. And we're going to take questions now. And I'm acting as a negative exemplar. So please talk into the mic and be heard, is the message I'm getting. So, yeah, we have a question here.
Hi, it's Vanessa, University of Edinburgh. My question is, as well, yes. By coincidence. My question is, I think I understand some of the risks of piloting in schools and so on, but if you don't do their way, how can we try those things out in a more safe manner?
I think the point we're trying to get at is who is doing this piloting in schools. And there's a lot of talk of involving schools in to participate in research, to pilot, try out tools and so on. What's actually happening with the Department for Education work is it's recruiting specific kinds of technologies, companies and so on, and then getting them into schools. So it's kind of massaging and managing that process. I suppose the core point I was trying to get across is if we pilot these kind of technologies in schools, then we are changing schools just by running the pilots. And it's that we're trying to investigate. What is actually happening to the school as it becomes a particular kind of testing site? So it's not just about, what does the test result in terms of, the kind of result in terms of, I don't know, a learning performance improvement and so on. But about what this means in terms of a change in schools at the scale of 1,000 schools in England that's, being anticipated here. So it's raising for us interesting questions, I think, about what kinds of products get into schools for this kind of pilot testing, and also what it means to kind of reconfigure a school into a testing site.
and why?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose that's behind a lot of what we're trying to do here, in terms of what I outlined as a kind of critical futuring approach is who is kind of carrying out these kinds of experiments in future making? Why are they carrying out those experiments? What kinds of effects do those activities have in the kinds of organizations, schools and classrooms that end up being the subject of those efforts? Yeah.
So. Okay, hi, can I be heard? Okay, great talk. Thanks very much and enjoyed it very much. Although much in the same way as you'd enjoy an episode of Black Mirror or something like that. But look, it seems clear that with the product trialing and the living labs and everything, it doesn't really matter how it turns out. The stories that it's happening, I think you captured this really well, already create the expectation and the desire not to be left behind. I suppose I was also thinking it's also notoriously difficult to prove anything when it comes to pedagogical effectiveness, or for that matter, to disprove it, so it's, even if we were going to organize these very rigorous research studies, it's unlikely that we'll ever be able to turn around and go, look, none of this stuff works. We can't really isolate the effects of a single technology. Yeah. But my real question, I suppose, though, is a version of FOMO really just behind so much of what we do on the level of individuals and institutions? So, like, is the motivation so often just fear of missing out? If enough sense can be created that, gosh, if you don't get this with this, you or your kids or your institution or your students, they're not going to be part of the future. Is that really the psychology behind it all?
I think we can read that into some of the politicians, policymakers' speeches. It's about establishing the UK as a kind of reference country, or England specifically. There's not quite the same level of enthusiasm in Scotland, where I'm based. But yeah, I think so. I think that kind of idea, not just fear of missing out, but an anxiety about being seen to be path leading. So that often it's at the Tony Blair Institute, which is doing a lot of advice into English education, is always referring to this massive scheme that's going on in Estonia. And Estonia is suddenly becoming the kind of the reference country for AI in schools development, because it's doing the pilot testing at this massive scale, because it's got the partnership with OpenAI to deliver ChatGPT to every student in the country and so on. So there's something there, I think, about a competition to be seen to be leading, and not to be the missing out one. Yeah. I think you're right about, the kind of the stories and expectations. So Jens Becker, the sociologist I draw on, talks about fictional expectations. What really matters is that, you produce these expectations that others kind of believe and get, carried along with it, even if it's fictional. It's what matters is that people treat it as if it could come true at some point. And your final point, which I thought was, or one of the other points you made, which I think is super important, is about this desire to prove pedagogical effectiveness. Is it possible to isolate the effects of AI from everything else that's happening in a classroom? Is it possible just to talk about learning as some kind of performance that happens as if it's kind of separate from the social context of the classroom and the fact that we have bodies and we interact with other people? All of these kind of pilot tests, product trials, all of this kind of assume that what we're interested in is a performance measurement of a particular kind of learning outcome, or we're interested in a performance measurement in terms of a time saving that's made by the teacher. So there are very, very particular kind of narrow methodological choices that are being made in some of these tests and trials as well. Thanks for your question.
We've one more question here, a short question, Francis, and then a short answer as well.
Okay.
Not sure if I can do short, especially after that, Ben. That was super. Lots of food for thought there. I'm just going to talk about Garod's FOMO situation and whether or not you think that this is not something that has occurred before. So classrooms as test centres seems to me to be historical. We test new pedagogical features and we test new technology for years and years and years. And so what is the big thing that's occurring now that we're suddenly deciding to take note of the fact that, hold on, the big companies are testing in our classrooms, but they've been doing that for years. years. Social media was a huge experiment, I think, on all of society. And so I guess I'm wondering, why are we looking at this now? And is it really just FOMO? Nobody wants bureaucratic forms filling all that out. There is big tech have created something that we all want or gives us convenience.
Yeah, sure. So I think, yeah, you're right. There is a history of experiments, trials, product tests, and so on in schools. And I think we need to acknowledge there are continuities here. I think for me, there's something about the scale and pace of what's going on here. The fact that we have policymakers, commercial organizations that appear to be talking precisely the same language, that commercial organizations are being given tickets to get directly into schools, often through things like memorandums of agreements. There's a memorandum of agreement between Google DeepMind and the Department for Education, which allows, these kinds of large-scale trials to happen in the 10 schools in the north of England and so on. So I completely recognize that there are always continuities, from the past to what we observe now. What we're trying to capture here is a kind of a set of activities which are all urgently framed around the idea that, or various organizations are making claims on the future and are acting often inside of schools to make that kind of future happen in the present. And there's something, I think, that's empirically important for us to get to grips with what's happening precisely now and what kinds of paths to the future that's setting into development in the present. I guess those are the kinds of things we're trying to get at. But yeah, thanks as always for the reminder of need a bit more history to some of this.
Ben, I've just a question. So thanks very much. It's really interesting and as a keynote, and it's important to problem solve and problem pose as well as problem solve. But my question is tongue-in-cheek. If you were Minister of Education for the next 10 years, what would you advise? It's just an easy question to finish.
Kind of the cheeky way round of, asking the question, what would you do? To which I can respond, I'm a researcher, I'm not a solution maker. Which is my answer, really. If I was a minister, I think there's an awful lot of expertise within the education sector that is being excluded. So there are certain education academics who are being invited in to do the projects with OpenAI, with Google, and so on. So there's a particular kind of politics in terms of invitations for inclusion or exclusion from some of the conversations and debates that urgently need to happen around AI, but not just AI, all kinds of technologies in schools. The really weird thing that's happening right at the moment and that ministers are about to have to grapple with is that the right wing are coming after this really hard because a lot of parent groups see AI, social media, screens, EdTech, everything as detrimental to children's mental health and to their cognitive health. Huge campaigns are coming. There's a best-selling book that's just come out by a neuroscientist who claims there's now very strong correlations between the use of tech in schools and a decline in test results in the States. It's going to have a huge effect. So ministers are going to have to deal with that anyway. I prefer that actually the debates around technology, AI, also drew on a wider range of educational expertise that might include some social scientists, some learning technologists, those of us who've really been working in this space for a very long time. Because at the moment, there is a sort of politics of inclusion in terms of what kind of expertise counts. And it's often the performance measurement expertise and what kinds of expertise is excluded. And that's most of the rest of us.
Thank you very much indeed, Ben.
So if you have any more questions for Ben, if you're involved in the horrors, if you're sullying yourself with social media, you can go on and follow Ben on there on LinkedIn and Blue Sky, and he's doing amazing things. Now, if you're a keen follower of Ben online on LinkedIn, you may have noticed his profile picture has changed over the years, and he's been wearing a lovely hat on his head, or his lovely head. So we've got you a hat, Ben. So we lured him We lured him to Ireland with a promise of a beanie. I'm not making this up.
I should put it on.
Yay, I love it. So, and Jennifer, where's Jennifer Gilligan? Jennifer, please stand up. Come on, get up. Thank you very much. Big round of applause for Jennifer, who has created the beautiful drawings of our speakers. So, and I said we were talking about this, and we were like, Ben wears a hat. Maybe we'll do a hat on him. And I never met you. We didn't want to go too wild, you know. And she drew this hat. I'm not making this up. We'll send this to you now. Of you wearing a giant sombrero. And I was like, no, it's like a beanie, like a beanie hat. But thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome.
Too.
Thank you very much.
So next up we're getting ready. We're getting our people for the Gasta up. And Dr. Tom Farley of Munster Technological University is going to compare this. He is one of our invited speakers. A Gasta is a short form of talk. Don't go anywhere unless you're in the Gasta. And Tom has published an interesting book recently, Doing Digital Learning with Confidence and Creativity.
You're coming next.
And